Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Megs or Megan, whichever you prefer to call me, also known as Spooky History with Megs. Been gone a while, and I do apologize for that. I've been working my butt off and doing research at the same time and trying to get this video together. So there's that. So today I'm going to talk about the South Carolina Lunatic Asylum, also known as the State Hospital on Bull Street, located in Columbia, South Carolina. And this particular place or city is about an hour and a half to a 2-hour drive. So I've never seen this location in person. Never explored it. I just found an article. Trigger warning. This video talks about mental illness, mistreatment of patients, and also may talk about mistreatment of the Black community, meaning that back in this era, African Americans were mistreated back in this time. So if you feel like this particular video would trigger you, I would advise you to kind of find you something more positive to watch, because a lot of this is really sad. It could trigger someone who potentially has dealt with being in an asylum. So if this is going to trigger you, then I suggest to go watch something more positive, something that'll make you laugh. There won't be no hard feelings here, because I understand mental illness is real. Your mental state is more important than a single view, okay? And I do have a heart for people with a mental illness. This is all just research that I've done. This is all, information that I came across during research. I mean, I have tabs on top of tabs on this specific topic. I don't own these photos that I'm about to show you. Also, I would like you to please consider subscribing, like this video, dislike this video, put your opinions down in the comments below. I have all links and resources of where this information can be found. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. I hope it sparks an interest. So let's dig in.
The Bull Street Asylum expands over 181 acres of land. Construction of the asylum began in 1821 and it first opened its doors in 1828. It was abandoned in 1996 after society moved away from long-term institutions and focused on therapy and psychotropic medications. The first 6 months of opening, they had trouble finding patients. Since funding was a major issue to keep it open, they were focused on finding wealthy families for treatment. The first patient to be admitted was a lady by the name of Eliza Fanning for insomnia. She was released because the family felt she was not getting better, and she was released as uncredited. The first physician to treat patients was a man by the name of James Davis. Davis was born on December 8, 1774 in Worcester County, Maryland. He moved to Lawrence District, South Carolina in 1784 and trained as a physician under George Ross between 1795 and 1797. During the asylum's first years, Davis wrote many letters and essays in the public press encouraging people to support the institution. The early years of the asylum's existence were difficult, both financially and in terms of securing enough patients, adequate staff, and even basic amenities. At times, the asylum was unable to purchase enough clothing, bedding, and food for the patients. Mortality and recovery rates were worse than in the later antebellum period. The recovery rate during Davis' period of tenure 19% was much lower than the 80 to 90% he and other asylum advocates had predicted. Davis was often ill during his tenure as asylum physician, and for several months in 1833 and 1834 he was unable to attend to his duties. He resigned in January 1835 and died in Fairfield District on August 4, 1838. He was buried in the First Presbyterian Churchyard in Columbia. The next patient to be admitted was John C. Calhoun's brother, a wealthy businessman. This helped others in the community accept that even the rich people had mental health issues, and it became more acceptable. In the 1820s, early treatments for the mad were bloodletting. This seemed to calm them during violent outbursts due to the pain of the procedure and the sight of blood. They used tranquilizer chairs as a treatment to prevent involuntary movements. Patients were strapped into chairs, unable to move or free themselves. Patients were wet down and bound to their beds with wet sheets. This was one of the earliest forms of shock treatment. This reduced the body temperature, causing the patient to calm down quickly. Another early treatment was locking patients in a dark room for extended periods of time. In the 1830s, brought on new treatments. The use of tonics became popular. They began using a lot of alcohol to sedate patients as well. In 1848, the asylum began admitting black patients. This was an issue in its beginning stages due to the times they were living in before it was passed or acceptable. A 14-year-old slave by the name of Jefferson was admitted as a favor to a wealthy farmer from Charleston, South Carolina. He was allowed to stay in the yard under a makeshift shelter. Other people of color were housed in the basement of the asylum. A man by the name of Daniel Cartwright was a famous physician that specialized in treating mental illness of the slave community, touting patients such as beating them for what he called drapetomania, a disorder for slaves that began to be disobedient and slacking in work duties. In 1840, brought much needed changes to the asylum. A farm and dairy were added to the grounds. This aided in fresh food and milk for the patients. It added a new form of treatment as well. The new therapy was declared as occupational therapy. It allowed the patients to learn a skill and keep them occupied. Most of the hard labor was still done by black patients. Light labor was done by white women. The hospital could support itself. It gained political support and was granted expansion of the grounds. The expansion provided a new building and recreational gardens. A man by the name of Thomas Kirkbride came up with a design for a visiting area and wards. This allowed families to visit their mentally ill relatives. In the early 1900s, a chapel was built in the center of the main building. It provided sunlight, and the sunlight was believed to help aid in patient treatment and cure them. The 19th century brought overcrowding to the facility and no cures. In 1860, South Carolina was the first state to concede from the Union. The hospital fell on hard times due to decreased funding caused by the Civil War. The hospital had to release patients who could be taken care of at home. In 1864, during the yellow fever outbreak, soldiers were housed in the asylum. They lived in holes outside the asylum, then in tents. Eventually, barracks were made to house them. The asylum became a prison for them. In the years 1891 through 1914, James Babcock became superintendent for the asylum. It became a home for problem people. Alcohol abusers, those families that had members that were difficult, and epileptics. He began a training program for nurses. He fought for better living conditions for the people of color. He used convict labor to build bricks to build onto the facility. TB began to spread throughout the asylum. In 1907, a new disease came about caused by a vitamin B complex deficiency. The disease was pellagra. This disorder caused dermatitis, diarrhea, and dementia. So the mentally were getting a disease that caused yet another mental illness. The germination of corn caused the deficiency. Between the years of 1837 through 1940, South Carolina was the first state to enrich cornmeal with vitamin to prevent this deficiency. In 1910, conditions were in decline and below living standards. Bed bugs, lice, and overflowing toilets. Patients were covered in feces, walls covered with dirt, vomit, and spit. Wards were poorly vented. White women had better living conditions. Violent patients slept on straw and ate from tin bowls. Patients were often tied up. Manure was found in the milk supply that was causing food poisoning in patients. Furnace emitted high levels of CO2 and 33% of patients died due to the severe living conditions of the asylum. African Americans got a separate hospital in 1913. Because of the increase of deaths in the asylum, burial grounds needed to be developed or neighboring ground were utilized for a fee. Potter's Field was used for people who did not have churches and Lower Cemetery for those with churches. The asylum wanted to use Elwood Cemetery to bury patients of color. However, they would not at that time. The asylum began burying them on the grounds of the hospital. A lady by the name of Sarah Allen became the first female physician to work for the asylum. She took care of the black female patients. A lady by the name of Eleanor Bennett Saunders in 1913 improved the asylum by testing for and treating those with syphilis. In 1914, a man by the name of Dr. Fred Williams becomes superintendent. He builds a bakery, laundry, and a mattress shop, and cottages for physicians so they can be on site 24/7. The Williams Building became the reception area. In 1943, there was a forced closure of the hospital because of World War II and the Depression. Dr. William S. Hall served in the war. He became a doctor after the war at the asylum. He brought his organization, medical expertise, and nutrition knowledge to the asylum. In 1957, statewide clinics were back up and running. Anti-psychotropics were introduced for schizophrenia and BPD, allowing the patients to re-enter the community. Dr. Hall eventually became superintendent. In 1963, changes in treatments came about to help the mentally ill. A lady by the name of Rosemary Kennedy was considered unstable and underwent a full frontal lobe lobotomy at age 23. Dr. Hall became the state commissioner for the state of South Carolina. In this time, blacks were housed in the Palmetto State Hospital. They did not have clean clothes and underwear. Mrs. Simpkins wanted to hold funding until black patients were taken care of like other patients who were white. In 1965, the desegregation of black patients took 3 to 5 years to complete. The Palmetto Hospital was used as an elderly home and renamed Crafts Barrow in 1966. In 1969, all South Carolina mental health facilities became accredited. A man by the name of Dr. Hall developed a training institute for doctors and nurses that made up a staff of 30,000 people. He took down the bricks from the walls surrounding the asylum to build the chapel. He retired in 1983. Over the years, the asylum treated 205,000 patients. The last of the patients were removed in 1990 and was completely abandoned in 1996.